Here's what's coming up in episode 219. J. Allen Cross.
And, I've actually been kind of surprised by the reaction from witches when I bring up paranormal investigation around them, because I find that they have two really big misconceptions. But we've actually come to find that poltergeists are actually not a spirit at all, that they are created by people. And so he gives this big, wide, inhumanly wide smile. And he has got a mouthful of shark teeth suddenly. And I'm like, oh, hell no.
Stop it right now. Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. Y'all, you know how at the end of every show, I always thank my Patreon supporters? And I always have a group of peeps who support the show at the $10 level, which there's not even a tier for that, so that's crazy. Well, I'll of course be doing that at the end of this episode, like usual. But guess what? JeanMarie rocks so much that she's supporting the show this month at the $15 level. I mean, what? I'm so appreciative. So everybody, please make sure you listen to the end today for the shout outs. And thank you, JeanMarie. Okay, let's pour the tea and get to my second interview with J. Allen Cross. J. Allen Cross out of Oregon returns with us today. And Jay is a practicing folk witch and paranormal investigator. He serves as psychic medium and occult specialist on a well-known investigative team out of the Portland metro area. He enjoys working as a consultant for other teams and spiritual workers, exploring haunted and abandoned places and writing about the paranormal. His previous appearance on the Big Seance podcast was in episode 178, where we talked about his first book, a great book, American Brujeria, Modern Mexican-American Folk Magic. And so this is his second book, and I'm excited. I had the chance to read it months ago now and check it out, and I really think it's great. So, Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
There were a few things going on when we talked last. It was in December 2020. So quite a few things, I imagine, have changed as they've changed with the whole world. What's going on with you nowadays?
Oh, surprisingly not a lot has changed for me, thankfully. But, been keeping up with the writing, of course, been keeping up with the spookiness. Something that we had to traverse through the pandemic was doing paranormal investigation from afar, doing it offsite, which when you work on a team like mine, that's mostly psychics, that tends to be a little bit easier, but it definitely did test us and kind of force us to get more resourceful, a little bit more creative with helping people with their hauntings from a distance. So that was interesting, but it was good for us, I think.
Yeah, I remember when I talked to you last, one of the things that fascinated me about you and your team is that you did have predominantly psychic mediums. We did talk about that, and I don't think that is the norm. Usually psychic mediums, unfortunately, tend to be thought of as sometimes a tool in paranormal investigation, and sometimes they're just allowed to be one of them, if they're if they're involved. And sounds like psychic mediums run the show in your team. And I think it's awesome. And I also wonder, when you talk about working from a distance in this book. And I wonder if the pandemic contributed to that in the book.
Absolutely. It really did. And I thought, this information, it's not something that tends to be put out a whole lot, this idea of working from a distance. And it seems to be something that seems very insurmountable, because we know that kind of paranormal investigation is seen as kind of a boots on the ground situation. But it was really important for me to add in what I had learned over the pandemic to the book, because nowadays, so much of our services are online. The people that you're working with, your spiritual workers, are in other states. They're in, or they're in different parts of the world. And so being able to do this work from a distance is really important. And so I was able to share kind of what I had learned and what I had had success with over the pandemic and put it in the book.
I want to just read the book description. And so here it is. As a witch, your ability to manipulate energy allows you to interact with ghosts in ways that other investigators can't. Discover how to use your magical toolkit to identify and resolve the 4 main types of haunting: residual, poltergeist, human earthbound, and inhuman entity. J. Allen Cross guides you through the basic principles of a haunting while building a foundation of paranormal investigation, witchcraft, and mediumship skills. You will learn how to craft a seal, open and close portals, perform an exorcism, and help spirits cross over. With more than 40 exercises and rituals, this book shows you how to make the most of your talents so you can bring peace to restless spirits and those they haunt. I like what you said, a foundation. And that's kind of what I was thinking as I was reading this. I remember thinking that. I feel like a lot of my listeners, even if they would never consider themselves researched enough to be paranormal investigators or have the abilities of a psychic medium, sometimes we're asked by friends or colleagues to just check something out, or maybe they're seen as a resource to somebody just simply because they're an enthusiast, I guess is a good word, in all of this stuff. Yeah. And so that's who I see benefiting from this book. And so would you say that's true?
Absolutely. And it was really important for me to give kind of an overview of the basics anyway. So because I knew I would have people from very different areas coming at this, so that would have their own strengths and weaknesses. So I cover things like witchcraft basics, and then I have another chapter that's mediumship basics, and then I have another chapter that's paranormal basics to kind of prime the whole thing. So if you're kind of looking at this book going, I'm not ready for that, it's something that I kind of walk you through 3 different worlds that kind of then get woven together through the rest of the book. But we started the basics, so you kind of know what's going on when we first begin.
And what are some of the common misconceptions that witches themselves have about paranormal investigation? Because there's not a big template out there to see how that role works.
It's true. It's true. And, I've actually been kind of surprised by the reaction from witches when I bring up paranormal investigation around them, because I find that they have 2 really big misconceptions. And the first one is that a lot of them seem to think that paranormal investigation is something that happens specifically on TV and only for TV. So I'll often, post something about like, yeah, witches is doing paranormal investigation. And people will comment like, well, I have no desire to be on TV, so I won't be doing paranormal investigation. And I'm like, wait, what?
I don't want to be on the Travel Channel.
Right. And I'm like, there is a whole lot of paranormal investigation teams out there in the world, and almost none of them are on TV. And I've ran into many of them who don't want to be on TV. So it's really not about that so much. And I also run into this misconception a lot that witches really think that paranormal investigation is bothersome or kind of like the equivalent of harassing spirits. But something that they don't take into consideration is the fact that a lot of these spirits aren't happy where they are. A lot of that assumption kind of works on the idea that all spirits on the other side are perfectly happy and don't need any help at all. But that's not something that I've found in a lot of paranormal cases. Sometimes you have paranormal activity because they are trying to get someone's attention, because they need some assistance or they need some sort of help. And so as investigators, we can come in and kind of be like, hey, what's going on? We can either pick it up through psychic sense or something like an EVP. We can try and get some communication and see what we can do to help. So a lot of these spirits or a lot of these cases that we go on do have spirits that need our assistance. And so to think that any form of paranormal investigation is bothersome worries me. Because sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, what if I had just been like, there's activity here and just been like, oh, don't want to bother you, bye. And this poor spirit's like, wait, no, come back. So, yeah.
You don't always move toward a removal or a crossing over or a clearing, do you? Is that always kind of the goal, or is it just situation based?
It does tend to be situation based. I do lean more towards doing some sort of work to heal or fix the situation. Because anytime you have paranormal activity, it usually is because something needs to be fixed. So if it's a case of earthbound spirits, sometimes they're perfectly happy being there. And if they're non-intrusive, like I'm okay with letting them stay there. At the same time, they're not meant to be on this side though. So they can experience some really unfortunate things by being stuck here for too long. Sometimes they can be susceptible to predation from other spirits. Sometimes they can kind of go through a decay process that's really not fun. So I do try to kind of talk them into going over to the other side, but they're really adamant about staying here. And if they're not causing any problems, I'm happy to let them stay if they would like, because I think that's a personal choice that is important to honor.
And, the living people that they're affecting in a lot of cases probably matter a lot too.
Yeah. And that's something I try and point out in the book too, is that, you always have to side with the living, because this world that we're in and this life is for the living. And sometimes I run across people who are like, yeah, if you have a ghost in your home that doesn't want you there, you should move out because you need to respect them. And I'm like, no, the house is for living people. They need to be able to live there. You kind of have to prioritize the living a little bit while still having compassion and respect for the spirits. It's an important balance.
In our modern world, unless that ghost is pulling in money and funds, unless they're paying rent. So what are some of the things that people might be surprised to learn about in this book?
Oh, I think a couple of things are going to surprise folks a little bit. One of them is my chapter on poltergeist activity, because a lot of the times, even now when I'm at paranormal conferences or in groups of witches that are allegedly, very educated on all this phenomenon, you still find this idea that poltergeists are, human spirits that are unruly or have died a violent death and now are angry. But we've actually come to find that poltergeists are actually not a spirit at all, that they are created by people and kind of the amounts of psychic energy that they're able to throw off. And that all depends on things like their life circumstances. Usually these people are either young or under a whole lot of pressure that causes them to kind of throw off all the psychic activity that then creates things like, moving objects or, things in the home stacking themselves all of a sudden. So I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that out of the 4 main types of haunting that we're going to, talk about in the book, only 2 of them actually have spirits involved in them, which is interesting. The other thing that I think people are going to kind of be surprised about is a great deal of the magic that I utilize in paranormal investigation is very simple. So I think people are going to be really looking for, elaborate spells with this kind of plant and this kind of candle. And while there is some of that in it, a great deal of it is mental magic, because you can't always be guaranteed to have certain tools with you in the field. So you need to be able to do things like, lock a spirit in a certain area in the home temporarily with just your mind, or set up protective barriers with just your mind, because you don't always know what you're going to have with you. So I teach the skills of mental magic in the book predominantly, and then we add tools onto it later. But I walk you through how to do all of that and kind of how it works. But I think people are going to be surprised at how much you can do with just your imagination a lot of the time.
I am a sucker for seeing anytime there's a ceremony in a book or a ritual or a spell. And, very rarely do I go around in my day and do those things. But I love the fact that they're there, and I could do it if I right. needed to. And you do have, I got really excited when I saw the EVP ceremony. Mm-hmm. EVP is something I've always been fascinated with. And it's the tool that I have used the most and I'm most familiar with. And so when I saw ceremony after it, I was like, oh boy, what is this?
it's a really good one to kind of experiment with, because what we know is that, or at least how we believe it works, is that certain spirits require a certain amount of energy in order to produce phenomena. Things like EVPs take energy. And something that I've come to learn through my interactions with spirits is that they don't get the energy from things like electronics the way that a lot of people think that they do, because they get it from us. And when they mess with things like electronics, it's to get a reaction out of us, which produces energy. Because, you see paranormal investigators like, oh, the light's flickering. And then they all get really excited all of a sudden, and then they are producing the energy for the spirit. And so the EVP ceremony is kind of a way to try and get ourselves to produce or emit a bunch of energy or raise the vibration in a space so that the spirits have a bit more to work with in order to try and communicate with us. And so with the EVP ceremony, it is geared towards an EVP, but you might get other activity too, like knocking or things moving, depending on how the spirit wants to communicate with you. Because sometimes they're like not really good at EVPs. They might be good at something else, or vice versa. So what we're just kind of essentially doing is trying to produce enough material for them to work with.
I love it. I've always said one of my favorite parts of an investigation is not the tools and everything, not the flashy things, but when you are just chilling and reaching out and doing, that EVP work. And again, as someone who doesn't have psychic medium abilities, I know I really do, but I don't. I'm not you. But I love sitting there. And to me, I get so excited. And the goal is to roll out the carpet, as if you were welcoming any important guest or someone you were excited to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
And just sitting there, imagining that I am having a communication with someone and meeting someone and learning about them. It makes I'm trying to think of super meaningful questions. And I've been known to it takes a lot to get me to cry anyway, but it gets me emotional sometimes sitting there thinking, and sometimes maybe it's an intuitive thing. Sometimes I feel like, wow, I feel like I really am, even if it doesn't pop up on an EVP,
mm-hmm.
I feel like I really am, or you get those kind of tingly feelings like something is going on here.
Yeah.
And I think too many people just kind of, let's do an EVP session. How many of you are here?
Right.
When did you die? Like all that stuff. And I don't think if you don't spend the time to connect and really get present,
mm-hmm.
And imagine that you really could be communicating with somebody, why do they want to even talk back to you?
Exactly. And that energy that we exude, as far as like our mood and our emotions and things like that are concerned, really do dictate whether or not a spirit is going to communicate with us or not. Because if we're just sitting here like, yeah, come at me, like spirit with your evidence, like they're just, if you ran into a person like that in real life, you just kind of be like, okay, I'm going to go over here, versus like someone who's sitting there like, I am open, I am friend, I have compassion, you're sending out this kind of energy that's very welcoming, then you're going to have way more of a chance at activity or evidence or, communication, simply because you're more energetically likable, I guess is a way to put it.
That's probably easier when you are, so many of my listeners, whenever they've been involved in paranormal investigation, it's probably, let's face it, it's probably been like some kind of tour
mm-hmm.
or some kind of touristy, let's go tour this popular haunted location. And a lot of those places are trampled through so much. It's hard to imagine, because you are definitely not the first one to come in there and ask them these questions.
The same questions they've heard over and over and over again.
And they probably know the tools and everything better than you do, because they
mm-hmm.
when I went to Waverly Hills, it was like, why are we sitting here explaining to these, spirits what these tools are? They see them every day all year long. But to me, if you are going into a fresh place
mm-hmm.
or someone's home, to me, that's like, oh my gosh, maybe you're the first person to really, really reach out and try to connect. And that's special to me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I also wanted to go back to what you said about poltergeists, because early on in my, spiritual shift, I've always called it, I would get so frustrated every time I saw different theories about poltergeists. And I think to me, one of the main problems is that I feel like we need to come up with a new name for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've come to hear this word poltergeist, and, there's the movie and as an entity, as like a thing, a poltergeist. And I'm like,
well, and poltergeist means noisy ghost.
Right. So we need to, because I really do think people getting into the field or people not super educated in the field get confused. And if we're constantly confusing people, I don't know. But then I guess there are people who still might feel, really, I think that sometimes it could be, but then maybe it's not a poltergeist. Then maybe it's just a ghost. If it really is an entity making noises, why does just because they make noises have to be that they are a poltergeist? A lot of ghosts would fit that category. It frustrates me so much.
Absolutely. Well, and you see some terms too thrown around. Like, so something that we're seeing a lot lately is utilizing terms like unintentional PK activity or, psychokinetic activity, or sometimes they throw chronic at the front. So it's like chronic unintentional PK activity, things like that. And I agree too, that it's kind of like, why does it always have to be a ghost? But at the same time too, something that I talk about in the book is that you can have multiple types of hauntings happening at once. So sometimes you do very much have a poltergeist that is caused by somebody in the house. And yet at the same time, that can be masking either some sort of other spirit entity that is in the home or a human earthbound spirit or a residual haunting or kind of any of the other three types. Poltergeist can kind of mask one of those. And so people, when you address the poltergeist situation, but your activity continues, people are like, well, we didn't do it right. It's like, no, you did. You just have something else at the same time. Or it can be hard to separate which ones are going on.
So in your bio, it mentions occult specialist. Mm-hmm. And this is something in recent years we've kind of seen come on the scene in paranormal groups. And I find it fascinating. Can you explain what the role is?
Absolutely. So essentially what my job is as a occult specialist, and there's different ways of approaching it. On my team, we tend to be a little bit more spiritual than we do like scientific. So on some teams, your occult specialist might be like a historian who is very well versed in, things that you might find buried in walls. I do that stuff as well, kind of like identifying some kind of mysterious, possibly magical objects that you might find, or discerning what might be signs of occult ritual in the home. Sometimes people buy old houses and then they find like, oh, in the basement, there's all these candles and this weird pentagram like in the corner. It's our job to kind of look at that and kind of go, okay, was this teenage angst? Was this actually something? For me, a lot of it is kind of being the resident witch. So if there's magical support that needs happening, or there's something that needs to be made for the team, or a possible route to fixing the haunting that is through magical means, all of that kind of tends to fall in my lap or kind of to me in that department on the team.
Very cool. I feel like that would be a position that I would apply for. It would be different because I, am not a witch, not a psychic medium, but that would be really fascinating to me. We were talking about ceremonies and things. You also have some recipes in here.
Yes.
And that's also something that like my ears go blink, blink when I see things like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can now make something. What are some of the recipes that you have?
Kind of some of the main ones that I really like to use are different types of oils that are meant to do certain things like bring protection or maybe help lift off negative energies, things like that. So I give you several recipes for those that are going to be great for you to carry in what I call my paranormal go bag. Things you can slip in there that are really useful on investigation. I particularly like the protection oils because after you remove something from a home like a negative entity, it's really important to make sure that it doesn't come back. And so having something like that on hand that you can just get out and do a little protection around the home is really helpful. I also give recipes for things like spiritual baths because us as investigators, we go out, and especially if you're doing the work in the book where you're really hands-on interacting with the haunting itself, it's important to then go home and do proper cleansing because you never know what you've come in contact with, what's still on you, what might be around you. So like one of the recipes I give is kind of my standard after investigation bath that I find really cleansing, but really simple is something that I call my Virgin Margarita Bath. Because it is limes, it's salt, and it's holy water into a bath. And then you kind of submerge yourself in that. And that's going to help kind of get rid of anything that might have been on you. So I give all kinds of recipes for things that are going to be helpful in this field.
I bet a lot of people went to Amazon and clicked buy as soon as you said margarita.
Exactly.
Margarita bath? What? Okay, sign me up. I kind of skipped over our commentary earlier about reading a home from a distance. And I think that this is a big topic. And it sounds like you all do this a lot. So tell us what that looks like now and how are you, getting proficient at it, I guess.
Absolutely. So on my team, we do something called pre-impressions, which means anytime that we have a case coming up, we're notified that there's a case coming up. We don't really get any information about it because most of us are psychics. So a lot of that is handled by our case manager, Kristen, who is amazing. And so what happens is we're notified that we have a case. Those of us who are chosen to go on this case, depending on where it is, what our scheduling is like, they'll pick, 2 to 5 of us sometimes to go and handle this. Those of us who are picked will get a chance to kind of ahead of time pick up and see if we can see what's there before we even get there. And each of us do this a little bit different. So we have some remote viewers on the team who don't request anything except for maybe like a case number or just the idea that we have a new case and they're able to work off of that. I like to receive pictures of the home. So the outside of the home and several pictures of the inside. And through those, I'm able to pick up on the energy of the home, what might be going on inside of it, as well as kind of pick up on any spiritual entities or maybe locations that might be hotspots. And that's something that I teach in the book, this idea of utilizing photos to do it. Because, photo, it's not going to give away too much information. It's just kind of like the inside of a house. And something I talk about too is kind of like not really looking at the photos so much, not about analyzing the photos. It's about kind of like sitting with them and almost looking through them in a way in order to pick up the psychic information instead of just kind of the visual information. But again, everybody on my team does this a little bit differently. We actually did add a pet psychic to the team who ended up talking to the family dog on one of our cases and getting all the information. Like I was shook by how much information they got from the family dog about how many people were in the home, what kind of activity was going on, when did it start. She had all the details. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but I teach you my method with pictures.
Have you all, in the last 2 years, I guess, have you started and resolved a haunting in a home completely remotely, like without ever going there?
There have been a couple that we've been able to put away or at least very much reduce the activity from a distance. It kind of depends on what's going on, because when it comes to fixing a haunting, you're always working in tandem with your clients. So there are certain things that we are able to do, but without them following through on things like specific homework or following certain bits of advice of what to do or maybe what to avoid. That can be a little bit different when you're not there in person to kind of get people to follow through with certain things. But I do feel like we've had quite a bit of success for working remotely.
Tell us about Clyde, and I'm almost afraid to ask, Clyde the Top Hat Man.
Yes, Clyde. I had to add an entire section in about Clyde simply because this book is a training manual to do what I do. And so it's very important for me to give people a heads up or a sense of certain things that they may run into while they're out there. So I met Clyde, quite a while ago. We were working a case in downtown Portland at a local business. And my team, when we get called to a case to do a resolve, we show up and we find out what's going on and we fix it. And we try and be out in about 4 hours as the kind of like our top limit to kind of get in and out in about 4 hours. So imagine my surprise when I've been told that we've had this case for about 8 years. And I was new on the team and I was like, what? So I go to this business and I meet the spirit who's very well dressed. I've never ran into a spirit that is wearing a top hat, a coat and tails, gloves, spats, like the whole 9 yards. This guy was very well put together. And I'm having a conversation with him like, okay, why are you here? What's going on? Like, what's the deal here? And we're kind of having this back and forth and he's being a little bit elusive. And suddenly, as I'm speaking with him, I'm realizing that he doesn't look right. Like, as I'm talking with him, I'm starting to notice that it almost looks like his skin doesn't fit him super well. And the only way that I can explain it is like in the first Men in Black movie, where the alien like takes over the farmer or whatever, and he has to kind of like adjust himself every now and again, is kind of the feeling that it gave me. And so he's there, he's saying something, and I go, wait. And I'm like, you're not a human, are you?
That's not unsettling at all.
Right. And I'm like, okay, like you're not a human. And it was so funny because he was so amused that I had figured it out. And so he gives this big, wide, like inhumanly wide smile. And he has got a mouthful of shark teeth suddenly. And I'm like, oh, hell no.
Stop it right now.
We're not doing this. Yeah, exactly. I was just like, shut it down. That's not something I'm okay with.
That is some Pennywise stuff.
Right. Exactly. I was like, not a fan of that. And so after that case, working with him there, I was kind of like, wow, like, because I've seen a lot of weird stuff and usually it's kind of a one-off. But then I ran into him again at a different place and then at a different one. And my encounters with him got so frequent that one day I popped his description into Google. I was like, this can't just be a me thing. And I had just started calling him Clyde because I had just been seeing him like all over the place. So I popped this description into Google and suddenly, boom, the Hat Man comes up, just all these different sites, all these different stuff. So apparently this is a thing that I didn't even know about. So I'm going through all these different people's encounters from like all over the world. There are also certain kind of spirits that are very similar. So there's one called High Hat from, I believe, the Seneca Nation that has some really intense similarities to the spirit that I call Clyde. There's also someone, I can't remember her name, but there is, I believe, a woman that did a whole book on encounters with the Hat Man. So it's something that a lot of people have actually come across. And I've spoke with other kind of psychics who have had encounters as well. And we kind of pick up on the same thing, that the Hat Man, or what I've kind of started calling Hat Men, are actually more than one spirit. Because when I run into them multiple times, I don't feel like it's the same spirit. It's the same type of spirit. They're all similarly dressed. Sometimes it's a bowler hat. Sometimes it's, like a full-on stovepipe hat. Sometimes it's, different kinds of hats, but it's the same basic description, very tall, very thin, a lot of weird stuff happening with the mouth. So sometimes it's a lot of sharp teeth. Sometimes it's like a really long tongue or like a missing lower jaw or kind of like weird things like that with the mouth are really commonly reported, as well as certain types of activity. So that was one of the ones where I was like, okay, this one has to go into the book because I'm coming across it so much that it needs to kind of be talked about a little bit.
When I hear you describe Clyde, do you think this is like one of those egregores that we're gradually creating, like Slender Man or like, whatever? Do you think it's something similar to that?
It could be. What I would think is probably an older spirit that is maybe taking on that identity as a means of receiving energetic support, if that makes sense. Kind of like, well, like all this energy is going to this area, so I'll just kind of step into it because it pretty much is already me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like a lot of people kind of believing in that does help. I don't think that it is completely a created spirit, though, because there are some kind of going back, like you're talking about, like indigenous tales, and he just seems older than that. So I'm not sure what exactly we call him.
Yeah.
What I've gotten a sense of is that you hear of shadow people. I have often gotten the sense that he's kind of the manager of the shadow people a little bit. He's kind of like
the coordinator.
Yeah, like a higher ranking kind of member of that sort of grouping is what I've come to understand a little bit. I'm sure other people would disagree.
The project manager.
Exactly. Someone's there kind of like to oversee the kind of the boss man of that. So.
Wow. I do not need nightmares of Clyde. I'll tell you that. Are there more books in your future?
I do believe that there are. There is one that I've kind of been plucking away at. The hard part with me and the work that I do is I love a good liminal space where I take two things that really should not go together and then form a bridge. And my book is kind of that bridge territory of like, yes, paranormal investigation and witchcraft, or, being both Mexican and American, kind of creating this bridge material, which some people are very into and some people are very not. So my third book kind of still goes along that idea. I'm still working on how exactly I want to approach it. It's all formulating. I do think that there is a third one coming.
Well, the next book could be How I Work with My Friend Clyde to Clear Your...
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. He's going to get like a byline in your next book, like, with help from...
Right? Adventures of Clyde.
A forward by Clyde.
That man.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Sorry. What is your most treasured possession?
What is my most treasured possession? That is a great question. I guess at this point in my life, it would probably be my wedding ring.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gotten a wedding ring yet.
Though it is a little bit funny because I am on my second wedding ring already. Same marriage. But Vegas stole my wedding ring. I went to Vegas with my husband and it just literally vanished off my finger. I was just sitting there at breakfast. I looked down and it's gone and I had not taken it off. And I'm like, Vegas, what did you do?
I have heard stories from a lot of same marriages, second wedding ring people.
Mm-hmm.
My mom famously lost, it was either her engagement ring or her wedding ring at a wave pool at a water park.
Oh, no.
And so then had to go and get another one. Are you still doing your podcast?
I am.
What's the name of that podcast?
It is Invoking Witchcraft podcast.
So what's been going on in that show recently?
It's been going great. We've had some interviews I've been really excited about. We had Erica Buenaflor, who is a really amazing voice in the kind of Mexican-American curanderismo field. And I absolutely love having her on. She's so intelligent and I learned so much when I speak with her. So I'm not very eloquent in the interview because I'm just like, my mind's just being blown the entire time. Similarly, we had Nicholas Pearson on.
Yeah.
And he does a lot of really interesting stuff with crystals. And Britton and I are not crystal people. So it was really neat to kind of have him on and have him educate us. And now I might be a little bit of a crystal person. We did a 2-part with him where the second part was on flower essences too, because he has a new book out on that. And both of those were whole new territory for me. And so I've really been liking it. Our podcast may go on a slight break for a couple of weeks. Britain's currently moving, and then I had COVID. So we are just now getting back around to it, but we are on our way to new episodes. So it is coming.
Awesome. Yeah. Shout out to your fabulous co-host. Yeah. Nicholas Pearson. I have never seen someone so hardcore crystals. And I never knew there could be so many books written
right
about crystals, and the books that he just pumps out. And I'm like, you have got to be really passionate and crazy about crystals.
Right. It's him and Karen Fraser. I'm like, how do you guys hold all this information in your brain about crystals? And, Nicholas, too, he's so very scientific about it. And so he doesn't just say like, oh, well, because of the vibration or whatever. He actually like talks about the crystal structure and the science and things like that, which is like really, it's what I need from crystal work. And then, of course, whenever I have questions about anything, I'm always like messaging Karen Fraser, like, what crystal do I need for this?
But I love that you're open to like, this is now another tool in your toolbox.
Yeah.
It's cool. So give us your final thoughts for today. And I learned this, speaking of Karen Fraser, I stole this from Karen Fraser, your shameless self-promotion. So final thoughts, and tell us what's coming up and where people can find you and all that.
Absolutely. So final thoughts for today are, if you are a witch, I want you to very much consider entering the world of paranormal investigation. I always say that there is no one better than witches to serve as referees between the spirits and living humans. So if there is a squabble between them, witches are the perfect people to show up there, be ambassadors for both sides, and, actually fix it and heal it and do good things there. So if you are a witch, definitely check out my new book, The Witch's Guide to the Paranormal. If you are an investigator who wants to get witchy or spookier, or a medium that wants to, definitely grab this book as well. It is for all of you. And shameless self-promotion, you can find me on Instagram mainly at Oregon_wood_witch. That is me. Beware of imposters, because there are many people trying to be me right now, so definitely look twice. And there you can schedule with me if you are having a paranormal situation. There's a link in my bio. You can schedule a paranormal consultation with me where we can discuss it. You can schedule readings with me, spell work with me, all kinds of stuff with me through the link in my bio there.
And y'all, this is a good book to have, especially if you are just getting into the field or newer in the field, just a resource. And I love books like that to know that I can go back to for ideas and pull it off the shelf and all of that. And I am so looking forward to the physical copy arriving on my doorstep so that I can have the shelving. Speaking of ceremonies, the shelving ceremony.
Yes.
To put it up on the shelf. And I get so excited, even though I'm such a dork, even though I've already read, a magical digital copy, I always have the physical book that comes later too. And it's like, I've never cracked it open physically, but it goes on the shelf. I'm just kind of I'm a horrible tree killer, I guess, because I have to have my physical books.
There is something about a physical copy of a book, though, that's like so much more, alive in a way. It becomes like a companion. And that's sort of what I wanted this book to be, was something that people would carry around with them to investigation. So if they ever needed me, I'd be right there,
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, Jay, you rock. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you to the following super paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Michael Henson, Daryl, Anne-Marie Sullivan, Natalie N., Kim Robb, Josiel Lorenzo, and Susan Davey. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/parlorguests, are Allie of Hocus Pocus Collector, Miranda from SpookyLittleHalloween.com, Chelsea from Cheers with Chelsea, Linda from ShimmeringMoons.com, Ann Rekovich from OzParatech.com, Janae Michaels from Grey House Tarot and Farm Artifacts, Mitchell Coombs from MitchellCoombs.com, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Amy Park Gedicke of AmyParkG.com, Lana and John of Carbon Lilies, Amy Taylor, Danielle Hemberry, Alicia Ferguson, Morgan O'Hearn, Sarita Cockerham, Christine Rath Selhe, Mindy Kentop, Hope Battaglia, Cass and Bailey, Melissa Armour, Diane Rax, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Jim Budd, David Rubenstein, and Norman and Linda Keller. That sound you just heard was the Above and Beyond There's Not Even a Category for Your Level of Support fireworks display, because I have 5 awesome listeners who support the show at the $10 level. Peggy Hagan, Glenna Becker, Steve Skinner, Kevin Gilbert, and James Wilfong. And guess what? Just like I said at the beginning of the show, I now have a new Parlor guest who's supporting the show at the $15 level. What? JeanMarie, oh my gosh, you rock. So thank you, Peggy, Glenna, Steve, Kevin, James, and now JeanMarie. And thank you, Paranerds. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. And you can continue the discussion and hang out with a great community of Paranerds by joining us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Want to hear your voice in a future episode? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.